Welcome to the Regenerative Culture Podcast, a new episode with one of the most important topics of our lifetime. It's regenerative education with a very special guest who I have met for the past, I would say, 4 years now, in which we have carried a really beautiful relationship, built community together, and now is part of our Regenerative Leadership Community. And we are very excited to welcome this guest for us to move forward into what it is, regenerative education. So let me introduce you with this special bio that I'm so surprised to even learn more about her. And my next guest is Radonda Dobbins, a certified intuitive life coach, trauma-informed NLP and anxiety certified. Someone whose life work has been deep service to children, families, and community. She spent years as a child welfare specialist with the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence, sitting on Florida's Child Abuse Death Review team, and advocating for real legislative change to protect children. In 2005, she founded the Home Educators Network of Central Florida, supporting over 900 families with resources, mentorship, and community connections for alternative education. She's a member of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, the science of mind and consciousness, and sits on the board of Back to Nature Wildlife Refuge. Radonda is someone who has dedicated her life to healing, protection, and the empowerment of families. And I'm really honored and glad to have her on the show today. Thank you, Radonda, for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. Thank you, Yoshi.
Yes, so the topic, regenerative education, is very broad and very deep, and we're going to make sure we get as much as we can in this conversation for us to expand the awareness of the alternatives of education, since we have been somehow manipulated in generations of our lives through conventional education. Most of us know that it doesn't serve us anymore. It serves an industrial system, our consumption culture, limiting us in many ways in our creativity, in our capacity, in our potential, making us think that we are all the same type of person, in which we have a diversity of personalities and we have a diversity of capacities. So that's why we're bringing in regenerative education, because it has diversity of alternatives. And we want to know how to guide us into where to go in this journey of this broad awareness of education throughout the world. So let's start through what are the alternatives that we have, and then we can go deep into how to know where to go on this journey.
Thank you, Yoshi. Yeah, I think John Taylor Gatto, who he was an educator in New York for over 20 years. And he actually left the education system because he felt he was doing more harm than good. And I think he put it best when he said there are as many ways to educate as there are fingerprints, because we all learn differently. There are so many ways to educate. There's many, even just within the homeschooling community, there's unschooling, there's hybrid learning, there's joining co-ops, there's all types of different education within homeschooling. And then of course there is the public education system, which many people use. And then now with technology, there's online public school, so that your children are still at home, but they're still learning the curricula set forth by the government. And as you said, our public school system started to basically pump out workers for our industrial society. So that's why it's, we're starting to see it's not really working in today's society, and certainly not for regenerative culture. And then of course, there's also private school, which would be like your Montessori, your Waldorf, and your various, even democratic schools and various types of schools in that sector, in the private sector. So
we have there's private mostly, and there's also alternative that are not expensive, for example, that it's more accessible.
Yes.
What is the difference between homeschooling and these other alternative education? Because homeschooling, is it that we have to just keep our kids at home? Can you clarify that a little bit?
No, homeschooling is you're taking yourself completely out of giving someone else authority to educate your child. Even in private schools, they still usually are set through a particular curricula. Even though Waldorf and Montessori schools are beautiful curriculas, it's still a set curricula where you as the parent don't have as much control as, or even your child. You know, in the democratic schools, yes, the children do get to have a say in how the school is run, but again, it's still a collective environment where they're all making those choices for the overall education. Versus homeschooling is more, it can be more child-led, where you are making the choices for your child. And of course, the biggest question I get with homeschooling was, what about socialization? We're not keeping our kids at home, locking them in a closet and sticking them in front of books. Homeschool means that we're keeping the crux of the control, basically, of the education at home, to where the parent and the children are making the choices for what's right for their education. That helps clarify a little bit.
Yeah, and the big question is like, how is it legal? Like, how can I make this happen where it's accepted in the legal space?
And that depends on where you live. In the United States, it is perfectly legal in all 50 states, but the states have different standards. For example, I homeschooled here in Florida. In Florida, they have very loose homeschooling laws. All you have to do is prove that your child made progress. That's it. There's no testing. There's no, you're just proving that your child made progress.
How
And
do you
you can do
prove?
that. You can either do that from a test. You can also do that by having a certified teacher look at their portfolio and see, okay, this child made progress. So those are the two ways here in Florida. In some other states, you would have to get your curricula pre-approved and things like that. So some other states aren't quite as friendly to, say, child-led learning or unschooling as Florida and some of the other states. So you really, to know the legalities, you have to check with your state's education system, their
Nice.
Department of Education.
You would be able to guide people from other states as well?
Yes, absolutely. And there are what we call umbrella schools. And basically, those are private schools that are set up in name only. Those private schools, they require you to send in your attendance, and they just require you to give, the basics on your kid, their name, where they're being schooled, that kind of thing. And those umbrella schools then answer, since they're a private school, then they're not required to answer to the same laws as homeschooling, because now they fall under the private school laws. So that's how some folks in some other states get away with, unschooling and things like that, because they put them under an umbrella school. It is a private school, but it's not a brick and mortar private school, if that makes sense.
Right. You mentioned you did homeschooling with your kid. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How did you start and realize, okay, I'm not going to take my kid to school anymore. I have to do something about this. Can you tell us that transition and the first steps you took action with?
Sure, there was no transition. She had been homeschooled throughout. And part of that was because I was part of our public school system. I was in advanced classes. I was in gifted classes. I was in AP, all of the smart kid classes, and I was still bored out of my skull. I spent most of my time in my guidance counselor's office in high school. I actually took my senior year of high school in college through what was then called the early admissions program. Now I think it's called dual enrollment. But I basically took my senior year as a college student. And as we know, college is not the same structure. It's much more, you know, it's much more where the student can kind of go back and forth with the instructor, as opposed to our public school system where it's, you know, there's, and that's the other thing. In the public school system teaches to two types of learners, auditory and visual learners. It doesn't teach to kinesthetic learners. It doesn't teach to all the different other learning styles. And, you know, that there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, those teachers are working with 30 plus students. So that's why it's structured that way. I understand that. But my daughter never went to public school. In fact, when I was considering maybe having her do online public school, she was about 5 and she took a little pre-kindergarten test, and it was the one where they are supposed to circle the pictures that start with a certain letter, and the letter was M, and there was a primate on that piece of paper. She did not circle that picture. I think she was like 5 years old. And I said, well, what about this one? And she said, no, mommy, that's an ape. It doesn't have a tail. And I said, well, do you think it's supposed to be a monkey? And she said, no, it's an ape. It doesn't have a tail. And she was absolutely right. But I knew, based on what the paper was asking, that whoever developed that paper thought for sure that was a monkey. So she would have had it marked wrong. And that's when I decided absolutely not, because she was right. And, you know, as a kindergartner, how's she going to explain that to the teacher when the teacher marks it wrong? So I said, no, we're not going to go that route. We're going to go the route where she's allowed to be right.
Right. Amazing. Yeah, that's one of many examples that we can go through when we're kids or for our children. So, now, how old is your child?
She is now 25. She had a passion for music. So she graduated from homeschooling, went to a very prestigious local conservatory on a full scholarship, and now she owns her own business where she teaches piano and strings. She also has teachers in almost every instrument, in acting, in voice. And so she teaches, she runs her own music school, both online and in person. And her passion is working with special needs kids. So that's what she does, is she works with special needs kids because she's able to teach them in alternative ways. She's able to teach them music in alternative ways as well.
Amazing. So she's independent. She has her own business, and it's very inspiring, especially at that age, to be already doing that when some of us in our 40s are still figuring it out.
Exactly.
So that's great. I'm so happy and proud of you to do that. And you said you also were involved with a new school that you opened, and also carrying this awareness to new kids, new families. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. When in 2013, I believe, is when I opened an actual brick and mortar enrichment center for homeschoolers. And the reason I did that is because we would go to like the art center for art classes. We would go to the zoo for classes, and we would go to all of these different places. And we continued to do that. But what I found was that for a lot of the quote unquote core things like English, you know, math, science, those type things, there wasn't really a lot out there. And what was out there, I didn't feel like really took the kids into consideration. So I kept saying, well, somebody needs to do something. Somebody needs to open an education center. Somebody needs to open something for these parents. And finally, one day I looked in the mirror and I said, well, I'm somebody. I had no idea what I was doing. I just rented a space and started interviewing experts in their field. They didn't have to have a teaching degree. As a matter of fact, my science teacher was in school to be a biologist, and he was excellent. When he did the final exam for the kids, he played Jeopardy. There was no paper, he just, you know, put them on teams and started asking questions in like Jeopardy form. And it wasn't until my daughter and I were on the ride home that it clicked for her, because she was so excited and she's telling me, oh, we won and this and that and da, da, da. And then all of a sudden she went, oh, that was our test, wasn't it? He wanted to know what we knew. And I said, that's exactly what it was. But it was a way for the kids, tests are scary. You're sitting there going, oh my gosh, do I know it? But when he turned it into a game, it was so much fun. And he could still gauge what they learned because he was still asking the questions. So that's what I did. And I ran that for until 2019, when my daughter started her college career.
That is so beautiful. Wow. So one big question is like, okay, we are worried about our kids not fulfilling the conventional curriculum. And if they don't feel it, how are they going to grow in their lives and through their careers and all this? But then I'm thinking, in most of my jobs, even corporate ones, I mean, all of my jobs, even corporate ones, I was never asked for any type of title or any type of proof that I was in school, in high school and college. So why are we so worried about like completing or being firm on they have to go to this school that we think it's the best and that they have to? So now tell us a little bit about that. How did your child go to college without having all this normal school type curriculum completed?
Well, what I found is, especially a lot of the private colleges, but even a lot of the state colleges, they love homeschoolers, because homeschoolers are already coming in with the skills that they're looking for in college. They're already coming in able to question and able to have a thirst for learning, versus public school kids who are, after 12 years of needing the ringing of a bell to tell you when to do things, needing to raise your hand and ask if you can go pee, a very basic necessity, a human biological thing that we just need to do. These kids in public school, they're little robots. So the colleges actually prefer homeschoolers. And what I did, all I had to do was provide transcripts. I just had to say, this is what she's learned. These are the things that, she has completed. And if it fit what they were looking for example, she went to school for music. So, her transcript was very math and music heavy. However, say she was going to school for marine biology, it would have been science heavy, because she was child led. Her learning was child led. Whatever she was passionate about is what we learned. Of course, we learned the core things, but you're learning those things throughout life, and parents are like, oh, well, can I actually teach my child? I'm like, who taught them to walk? Who taught them to talk? Who taught them to stop, pooping in their own diaper? Like, we're our children's first teachers. So of course we can teach them what they need to know in life, because we're living life. So basically all she needed was a transcript. And I know all schools are different. The other thing was, from ninth grade, even though we didn't consider it grades, we just, went by what we were interested in learning. But from what public school would have considered ninth grade forward until she was out of school, she had attended the college's strings program. So she already knew the professors. They saw that she was an excellent violist, and in her junior year of high school, the viola professor came up to me and said, I want to teach your daughter. And it was a $60,000 a year school. And I looked at him as a single parent and went, then you're going to have to find her some money. And he did. That's how she, of course she had to audition and go through the hoops, but, so to a parent who's afraid, if their kid is on the college path, to a parent who is afraid, don't be. The colleges love homeschoolers because they don't need a bell to tell them when to change class. They don't need their hand held. They're already out there talking to adults, and they're not the thing that people ask me the most is, what about socialization? How is your child socialized? And when you really think about it, how are public school children socialized? Because they are in a classroom with students exactly their same age. And most schools are in a particular neighborhood. So they're in a classroom with kids of their same socioeconomic status. And that's the little bubble that they live in. Whereas homeschoolers are talking to adults, they're talking to kids older than them, they're doing co-ops with kids of all ages, they're helping the little ones, the bigger ones are helping them. So to me, it's a much more real world like atmosphere than the public school system. We're taking kids that are used to only being in a small little area with kids their same age and their same socioeconomic status, and in a lot of cases their same culture and race, and they've had that little bubble for 12 years, and then they're thrust into the real world where it's very diverse and wonderful. And homeschoolers, I think, are more prepared for that.
Amazing. That reminds me, I was in California and I started teaching salsa dancing in my life or in general. And then I was invited to a high school. And in that high school, I didn't know this because I didn't know. And I learned that the high school divides kids about their age, but also about their personalities. So kids will be separated, even if in their same age range. They will have classes where more kids are more of a hyper type personality or more smarter personality, another class. In another class with the kids that are more like peaceful, like low energy type. And that's not beneficial at all. We want that diversity. And I feel that that's purposely done to keep us more limited, more in that bubble, and not help us develop these just patterns of our brain that can help grow with our diversity of personalities that we can learn from. So that's so important. So get your kids out of the conventional school. I'm just saying, it's your choice at the end. And a lot of people, parents, are a little bit afraid, nervous about that. And it's okay. It's part of it. And we have Radonda here, and we have also two other facilitators that have experienced this for a long time, that we are going to share a workshop about this on Thursday. So I want to invite you to go deep with us and start taking action and not let more time go by. Another school year, because a school year for a kid is a long time and a lot can happen in that school year. So yeah. Now,
And I will say, you can
go
pull your
ahead.
child out at any time.
What's that?
You can pull your child out of school at any time. You don't have to do
Anytime.
it over the summer. You can decide to homeschool at any point.
Yes.
So, and a lot of people are afraid too. Well, what if I pull them out and it doesn't work? Okay, well, put them back in. If it doesn't work for your family, like there's no horrible thing. Like the school's not going to say, well, we can't take them back, but it will work, and it's an easy process. And I think for parents too, we have to start thinking outside of the box and outside of the system that we were raised in, because most of us were probably sent through the public school system. So we have to kind of unschool our own brains in order to feel comfortable with our kids. No, if you watch a child, they're so curious. They are so curious about everything. They watch the ants, they look at the little lizards, they're looking at the birds, they're looking at the trees. How many toddlers do you know that are constantly asking, why are there clouds? Why is the sky blue? Toddlers ask 1,000 questions. And the school shuts them up. Because what do they tell them? You can't talk in class. You can't interact with your peers. You can't hear other perspectives. You're taught your one teacher's perspective, and that's it.
Right. So if I want to get someone I get my kids out of the school in the middle of the year. What do I do? Where do I take them? What can I do then? Like a first step, like, okay, you know what? I don't want to bring you to this school anymore. Let's go to another one, or let's do something else. What would that step be?
You literally disenroll them. You go in and you sign a paper. You just sign a form saying that you're choosing either to private school or to homeschool, and that's it. You just sign a form. That's it. You can pull your kids out and homeschool them at any point.
So if I want to do homeschooling, what do I do? I just keep them
You can
here. Where
decide.
do I
You
contact
can decide
someone?
your curricula. There are plenty of online curriculas that you can use. If you want to use a specific curricula, for us, for myself and my daughter, I did a hybrid learning. Basically, I did child-led learning. Whatever she was interested in is what we learned about. Like in public school, they might tell you, oh, in third grade, you have to learn American history. Well, okay, maybe she wasn't interested in American history in third grade, but maybe in fourth grade, we went to, there's a fort called Fort Christmas near us. Maybe we went to the fort and she started getting interested in, oh, why was this built, and things like that. Homeschooling is very immersive. We're constantly at the library, we're at the history centers, we're at the art centers, and all of that. People are like, oh, well, isn't that a privilege? Don't you have to be wealthy to homeschool? No, most of those things are very inexpensive. And a lot of them have free homeschool classes. So, it's just living life.
You were basically your child's teacher, and
I was.
you were taking your child different places. And what did you do with that socialization part of it?
We also did co-ops. She was in dance. She was, and when she's going to these different places, when she's going to the art museum, she was interacting with kids who were also in the art museum taking that little class where they were doing art. So she was interacting with all kinds of kids, all ages. We went to the science center and they had courses for kids, and she was interacting with those kids. She was interacting at the zoos when she was learning about the animals there. She was interacting in co-ops. We would get together at the park. And people are like, oh, well, I'm afraid that, my kid would miss out on like the dances and things like that when they're older. Guess what? We had our own dances. We had, at least 80, 90 kids. We rented a space. I talked to my friends. I knew a DJ. They came out and did it for free. They had a blast. I mean, we had photographers there, so they got all their pictures done just like they would at a prom.
So I want to ask, what about the parents that don't have time for being part of their day-to-day life, and they have to go to a job that they have to be at every day, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 maybe? I need to put them somewhere. How can I do that?
There are a lot of private schools that are more homeschooling friendly, so that they would teach your child. Now that is a private school setting, but they would use their curricula. So you pick something that works with your child, and you can, research that. And you and your child, I encourage you to have your child involved in their education. Where do they want to go? What do they want to do? And sometimes through co-ops, there's other parents. For me, if I had someone in my co-op that said, hey, I have to work, I would be like, oh, bring your child, I'll take them. I had a van when my child was young on purpose, because I was never just taking my own child somewhere. So there's a community. There's a whole community. I would say get involved in your homeschool co-op. Just like you read in my bio, I started one called Home Educators Network of Central Florida. We grew from about 20 families when I first started. It was an online, kind of way before Facebook. We had Yahoo groups. So it was a Yahoo group, and, everybody communicated on that. And I had over 900 families, and they would pick and choose the events that they wanted to go to. And if a parent couldn't make it, then they would send their kid with another parent that they met. And, just like in public school, if your kid is in an extracurricular activity and you can't make it, there's usually someone to take them.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's where the saying goes. It takes a community to raise a child. And if
100%.
you build community, you don't need the conventional schools. You work with your neighborhood kids and families, knock on their door, bring them a cake or something, meet their kids, bring their kids with you, do a little party in your house or something with your neighborhood, or go online to different social media platforms and find a group of parents that are already doing homeschooling or some type of alternative school, or create your own and start your own and start bringing people in and start organizing yourself and make better decisions for your kids, for all of your kids. So there are options, right? So we have already shared today many ways of how to get out and do some amazing decisions for your kids. And now I want to share something really important is about the health of our kids. Because most schools, if not all of the conventional, especially public schools, give lunch boxes to kids that are included within the school system, the cafeteria, that are conventional. It's kind of like airport food or hospital food, you know? And even sometimes as a busy parent, I even buy conventional, really produced snacks and give our child lunch boxes of these type of foods over every day, 5 days a week, even weekends. And then eventually they're not healthy. They're maybe overweight, or maybe their brain capacity is not in full potential and it's slow, or maybe too fast and full of sugar and they're hyper a lot. So we want to observe that a lot of the education also is related to health, having
Absolutely.
them have the power of understanding how to carry their lives since they're kids with healthy practice, a discipline. And discipline is not a bad word. It's just a consistent way of becoming aware, of being conscious about our healthy choices. And
Absolutely.
a
And
Sunday
I would,
a Sunday evening can be a really good way to prepare for the rest of the week, how to eat for the rest of the week and have a good time with your kids preparing the food together.
Mhm.
So
And I was giggling when you were saying that, because my daughter was in Girl Scouts, and we had an event that was in a public school cafeteria, and they had the menu posted, and she was probably about 8 or 9, and I saw her looking at the wall, and I'm wondering what she's looking at, and finally she said, "Mommy, no wonder these kids aren't learning. Did you see what they're eating?" Because the entire month, like every week, there was chicken nuggets every single week. And
wow.
then hot dogs, pizza, just very what what our society calls kid-friendly foods, but it wasn't really food. So when you were talking about that, it was kind of funny, because my daughter even pointed that out at 8, because she knew how to eat healthy because she hadn't been exposed to that. But you're absolutely right. Not only are their minds not being nourished, but their bellies aren't either. And that's a really good point that they usually don't bring up. People don't usually don't bring up when they're talking about alternative education.
Yeah, and it carries that throughout life. And a lot of our problems are because we're not healthy in our bodies. We're full of anxiety and even depression, distractions, and it has a lot to do with how we eat. And then carries one thing carries to another, and then we're addicted to the phone or addicted to other things, and we can't establish our lives good enough from the very beginning since we were kids. So now in an alternative education, we may keep that pattern as parents of like, oh, I'm busy and I'm gonna take the kids from the neighbors over here and everything, and then we buy some chips here and maybe some pizza here and maybe something here, and we may accidentally carry these habits still through the alternative education systems that we're creating with our communities. So a highlight here is to also bring that awareness, like, hey, let's do a picnic where the parents come with our kids, and we all bring something that we cook together as a family and share it on the picnic really nice, and talk about why it is important to eat healthy. So just an idea of many that we can do. So I just wanted to highlight that for sure.
Absolutely. And you can add cooking into the curricula. Fractions are cooking, measuring, all of that. Cooking is math. So,
Right.
bringing your child into the kitchen with you to help you cook, they're learning math and science at the same time. Baking, there's a lot of science in baking, and there's a lot of math in cooking. So, bringing that curricula to life right in the kitchen is important as well.
Perfect. Yeah, good observation. And the nutrition part of it, and the health, and why each element is what's properties on each element, like from the apple to the celery to anything that we want to eat, and where does it come from, right? From the gardens, and that's another curriculum that could be there. Is like gardening and how to produce our own food. A lot of kids in conventional education don't know what an eggplant is, maybe. Or where does it come from? Or how does a pineapple grow? Or, yeah, I just don't want to go that deep on that. We already know. So with this said, I would like us to recommend our parents to step into creating a plan to get their kids out. So this is important because, okay, what will be the first 3 steps to just get it in there and make sure we are in the path? And if you want to go deeper, come to our workshop this Thursday, and we're going to share even a more structured way how to do this and start taking action maybe right now in June for the summer, and make this happen, because the earlier, the better for our kids and the better for the world, because it's all about the future generations. And that's what's up. So what do you think, Radonda? What would those 3 steps help our parents that are ready for this?
The number 1 step, in my opinion, is some sort of family meeting and including the kids. The very first step is asking your children, what is important to them? What are they wanting to learn? What are they passionate about? What are they curious about? And you can do that also by observing. What is your child curious about? What lights them up? What are they passionate about? So that's your number 1 step. Your number 2 step is making that choice. It's literally, once you know what your child wants to learn about, maybe researching, if you can't homeschool them, if researching the private schools out there, the democratic schools, Waldorf schools, Montessori schools, all of the great alternatives that maybe aren't homeschooling. But if you can homeschool, and a lot of you can, especially in this digital age, if you can work from home, do so. If you're in a 2-parent household, I was a single mom, and I homeschooled my daughter all throughout. So it can be done. So making that choice, how it's going to work for your family. And the 3rd step is to do it. Just go in, put it out, and and rock and roll. And you don't have to know everything. We changed ideas on math curricula. Like, you don't have to know everything. That's the important thing to realize, is you do not have to know exactly what you're doing. You just have to have the passion to do it, and to listen to your child. What do they want to learn about? What are they passionate about? And I will also say, if your kid's on a tablet or their phone, you need to stop that right away, because that is going to get the curiosity. So, definitely removing that. But that's just a given. So the 3 steps for me would be: ask your children, make your children part of the process. Of course, you're going to lead the process, but, asking them their opinion and what they're passionate about. And the 2nd step is researching how to, help them with their passions. What schools are out there? If you could homeschool, what would that look like? Doing the research. And the 3rd step is to do it.
Beautiful. I'm so happy you mentioned about the technology. It has to be a certain control. I have to say control, because we are still parents, And parents need to have a certain type of authority. Nowadays, it's normal to let our kids do whatever they want and even be afraid of not of taking some type of control, because sometimes the kids have strong reactions, and because we want to avoid those reactions and all that energy, we don't do anything about it. So I want to highlight one of the big important topic or area that we want to make sure our kids have discipline in this regenerative education area is to have control with the technology. As you may know, it's specifically designed to be addicted, and that messes up our brain, our intelligence, our creativity, our memory, and all kinds of things. And to step us out from being social with other kids, because I've seen now a lot of it, especially in my family, a lot of youth are very afraid to socialize physically with other kids, with other youth. We're talking about 12-year-olds, 13, 15-year-olds, 18-year-olds. And that's one of the biggest concerns, because for us to be, as a human, thriving in life, we need each other in many ways for many reasons. First, to learn about ourselves through relationships, as well as business wise, even where the more we have relationships with others, we can and exchange goods and services and thrive all together based on how we interact with each other and build ourselves, our personality, our character, and all of that. So very important to make sure we have that as a highlight in the regenerative education movement. And any last words, Radonda, before we go with all this deep topic?
I just want to encourage parents that yes, you can. Yes, you can teach your children. You were their primary teacher. You taught them to walk. You taught them to talk. You taught them everything that they knew in the beginning. You taught them everything that they needed to know just to exist in the world. So yes, you can homeschool. You can teach your children. And if you can't, find the village. Other people, for example, my daughter, I'm okay with art, but I'm not an art teacher. So I would find an art teacher. So there are many, many ways. Find your village and trust yourself. You were their primary teacher to begin with. You were their very first teacher. So I think it's important for parents to remember that. And you did a good job with that.
Beautiful. Yes, thank you so much. This is valuing your child's life. Reevaluate what is your priority. And we, as a parent, want to prioritize our children. We want the best for them, the best quality education, the best quality food, the best quality spaces and relationships that they can have, so they can develop and expand their everything, creativity, potential in every aspect. So yeah, let's do that. And if you are thinking about having kids like me, I'm so happy that I'm already prepared to make this happen and have a whole plan for my next generations to just be superhumans. And yeah, thank you so much, Radonda, for today. I appreciate you. If someone wants to go deeper, please contact Radonda, and she can help guide you in the process of what is it to do in terms of regenerative education. If you have one kid, two kids, three kids, five kids, I can get a little stressful or hard to make this happen, but you have community, you have us, we can support in many ways. So we are not alone, even though we seem to be in these times, but we are here. So thank you very much. If you also want to join us on the community leadership, we are having this workshop on Thursday, 1 p.m. EST, and you're going to meet other two beautiful women. I think women are the ones that are taking the lead on this. And these women are also have expertise on this movement. So we're going to learn about what their experience and their perspective is about this area. And we want to have fun doing it. So come join us. It's a free event. And yeah, that's it for now. I appreciate you, and love and prosperity for all Muchas gracias.
Thank you.